All right, guys, what you're going to do for this weekend is a short worksheet that basically takes the information you gained in the last couple videos and has you apply it. Now, one of the things you'll notice is this data set, unlike the one that we watched in the video, is very short. So here, instead of having 25 students or whatever we had in there, we now have 5 students. So it should be much easier for you guys to begin to calculate the kind of things you need to. So what you'll do is read through the instruction. I'll read through it with you here. As a student who lives very, very close to the beach, you're weighing your options one day. On the one hand, you have your Psych 391 class. On the other hand, there's the soft, sandy beach, just calling your name. Although your Psych 391 professor's lectures are absurdly interesting, and you often find yourself hanging on his every word. Today, the sun is out, the surf is up, and you're thinking, it's just one class. How much could my grade possibly drop if I missed just one class? Stumped by this quagmire, you begin to cycle downward in despair. But then you remember back to your lecture on regression analysis and think, this seems like one of those statistical moments in life. Maybe I'll use regression to help me make my decision. So you call up your professor. You ask for a copy of last year's attendance sheet and each student's average exam score, all with the identifying information removed, of course. He, being noble of heart and mind, of course obliges you. Below are the number of absences and the average test score for each student in this admittedly small class. Using these data, calculate how many percentage points a student's average exam grade is likely to drop for each additional absence. In other words, if you miss one time, how much will your exam grade likely drop? If you miss 2 classes, how much will it drop again? So to do this, you're going to need to create a regression equation. But in order to create a regression equation, you're going to need to use some of the information that we've already learned. So one of the things I want to point to right away is that on the very last page of this worksheet, you have the equations for each one of these. So here for deviation scores, a deviation, remember, is simply the distance between each individual point and the average point. Or, remember, even more helpfully here, the difference between your observation and your expectation. Remember, in this case, if you know nothing about anyone in this class, your best expectation for how anyone performs on the test is going to be the average exam grade of the class. So taking all of these, the average of these is your expectation. This is like the null hypothesis. In other words, if no one differs at all systematically from each other, this is how people are going to score, the average of these. But what we do find is that individuals may score differently. So this person might score differently than the mean. This person might score differently from the mean. In other words, these observed scores may deviate from our expected scores, or the average of everyone. And so this is essentially what's going to make up your regression equation. So what you're going to do is for each one, you are going to find, for instance, the average of x. So here I've given you spaces for the mean of x and the mean of y. This is going to be your very first step, because remember, every deviation score involves these mean scores, either the mean of the exam grades or the mean of the absences. So the first thing you're going to do is calculate those means. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to work over and calculate the deviation scores. Here, because this is the x deviation, I'm going to look over my x column and I see my observation is that this person was absent 2 times. What I want to know is how much is 2 different from the mean of x, the average number of absences. I'm going to do the same thing over here for y. Right here for my y deviation, I'm going to take a look over at the y column, and I want to know how much does this y right here, 76, that exam score, differ from the average exam score? So my deviation is going to be equal to each one of these observations minus the average. Now the cross product, again, to look up any of these, all I have to do is to go to this last page. For the cross product, I'm going to do x minus the mean times y minus the mean of y. So back up here, this is going to be x minus the mean of x, I'm just in a different color, x minus the mean of x times y minus the mean of x. So in other words, this is simply going to be my x deviation times my y deviation. Okay, now we can move over and we can do, let's look at, I'll do purple. For the deviation squared, all I'm going to do for this is take my squared value, put it over here. So here this would be 2 minus the mean of x squared. And for the y deviation, we're going to do something very similar. So here we'll take this y deviation and square it over there. Okay, those are all the basic, simple calculations you need to do. And all you're going to do it is for these 5 students. Once you do this, you're then going to sum up a lot of these scores because you're going to need the sums in order to figure out some of the other elements. So for instance here, I'm going to need the sum of the cross products. Okay, down here I'm going to need the sum of the deviation squares of x and the sum of the deviation squares of y. So as you go through each one of these, you'll calculate out the sum scores, and then using these sum scores, you can make reference to things like, okay, what is the covariance, sum of the cross products divided by n. Up here, I simply am going to look down at the sum of the cross products divided by n. N is the number of students, and that's going to give me my covariance. Okay, I think I've given you enough to get started on this, and you've got the dramatic reading of the instructions. Feel free to skip over those if, I guess, it's too late already. You've wasted your time. Congratulations. Let me know if you have major questions, but otherwise we'll fill this out. And on Monday when we enter class, we'll do a brief regression exercise as a quiz that should look relatively similar to this. It'll involve similar calculations. And then we'll go through and actually take a look at how we can run some regressions like this using online software. All right. Have a wonderful weekend and happy statistics to you.